The night sky over New Detroit was clear, the stars visible even through the haze of the city's pollution. In the distance, the neon lights of the crowded megacity flickered like restless fireflies. But here, on the outskirts, where the city's influence barely reached, everything was quiet. The scrapyard stretched out like a graveyard for forgotten machines, littered with the rusting remains of ships and vehicles that had seen better days. Riley Quinn leaned back in her creaky swivel chair, wiping a streak of oil from her forehead with the back of her gloved hand. The old interstellar cargo hauler she was working on was a real Beast A relic from the early days of space travel. Its battered hull was covered in dents and scorch marks from old meteorite impacts, and the engine was a mess of outdated wiring. Most mechanics wouldn't have even bothered, but Riley had never been one to turn down a challenge. She reached for her coffee, now cold and bitter, when suddenly her eyes caught a flash of light in the sky. At first, she thought it was just another meteorite burning up in the atmosphere, but as the light grew brighter and began to weave erratically, her instincts told her something was wrong. Riley dropped her coffee, sending the mug clattering to the ground. She sprinted to the edge of her workshop, squinting up at the sky. The object was no meteorite, it was a ship, and it was coming in fast. The vessel's engine sputtered, leaving trails of thick black smoke behind it. Sparks flew as it hurtled through the atmosphere, veering dangerously off course. "Oh, hell," she muttered under her breath. This was more than just a crash, it was an emergency landing gone wrong. She grabbed her toolkit, an old habit she couldn't break, and ran toward the edge of her property, where the ship looked like it was going to hit. The ground trembled as the ship slammed into the dirt with a deafening crash, sending a shockwave through the air. Riley shielded her face from the flying debris, her heart racing. When the dust settled, she saw the ship lying on its side, partially buried in the earth. Its sleek, streamlined hull was covered in strange, luminescent markings that she didn't recognize. She approached cautiously, the heat from the wreckage making the air shimmer. The ship was clearly not human-made. It was too elegant, too advanced, nothing like the clunky cargo freighters or military vessels she usually saw. The design was both beautiful and alien, with curves and patterns that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. Riley's curiosity got the better of her. Ignoring the scorching heat radiating from the ship's hull, she pried open a side panel using her plasma wrench. The hatch hissed and groaned as it gave way, revealing a small cockpit filled with smoke and blinking lights. Inside, a figure lay slumped over the controls. Riley's breath caught in her throat. It was an alien, but not one she recognized. The creature's skin was translucent, almost ethereal, with veins that glowed faintly beneath its surface. Its eyes, closed and sunken, were large and luminescent, giving it an otherworldly appearance even in its unconscious state. "Hey, can you hear me?" she called out, but there was no response. The alien's breathing was shallow, and dark fluid oozed from a deep gash on its forehead. It was clear he was in bad shape. Riley hesitated for only a moment before she made her decision. She might not know what this creature was or why it had crash-landed on Earth, but she couldn't just leave it to die. That wasn't who she was. "All right, big guy," she muttered as she unbuckled the pilot's harness. "Let's get you out of here." She wrapped one arm around the alien's torso, surprised at how light he was, and hauled him out of the smoking cockpit. The acrid scent of burning circuitry filled her nostrils, but she pushed it aside, focusing on getting the alien to safety. As she dragged him away from the wreckage, the ship emitted a series of high-pitched beeps, and Riley's heart sank. That sound was unmistakable. It was the ship's automated distress signal. Whoever this alien was, someone, somewhere, was going to come looking for him. And if that someone was hostile, she had just made herself a target. "Damn it," she cursed under her breath. "Why do I always get myself into these messes?" She laid the alien down on the workbench inside her garage, wiping sweat from her brow. The shop's dim lights cast a warm glow on the stranger's shimmering skin, making him look like something out of a dream or a nightmare. Riley quickly scanned him with her handheld medical device. The readings were erratic, displaying information she couldn't fully interpret. Alien physiology wasn't exactly her specialty, but she could tell enough to know he was in critical condition. "Come on, hang in there," she whispered, grabbing a roll of bandages and her soldering gun. She had no idea if human medical supplies would work on him, but she had to try. The alien stirred slightly, his eyes fluttering open for a brief moment. He stared at her with those deep, glowing eyes, filled with a mixture of confusion and pain. Riley tried to offer a reassuring smile. "Hey, buddy. You're going to be okay," she said, even though she wasn't entirely sure of that herself. The alien's mouth moved, but no sound came out. He tried again, his voice weak and rasping. "You, help, why?" Riley hesitated, surprised he could even speak her language. "Because you're hurt," she replied simply, tightening the bandage around his wound. "And I'm the only mechanic around here crazy enough to help an alien." The alien's eyes drifted shut again, and Riley feared he might slip away, but his breathing stabilized, becoming less ragged. For now, at least, he was alive. But as she worked, Riley couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get much more complicated. The distress signal was still broadcasting, a beacon calling out into the cold expanse of space. Someone would come looking, and when they did, she had no idea if they would be friend or foe. The night that had started with a simple repair job had turned into something far more dangerous. And for the first time in years, Riley felt a thrill of something she thought she'd lost long ago: purpose. She glanced at the unconscious alien on her workbench, his strange, luminous eyes closed in fitful rest. "Hang in there, pal," she murmured. "We're just getting started." Riley's workshop was filled with the soft hum of machines and the smell of burning metal. She had barricaded the doors and shut off the shop's external lights. The only illumination came from the dim, flickering lamps hanging above her workbench, casting long shadows that danced across the cluttered walls. The alien Soren, as he had weakly identified himself before slipping back into unconsciousness, was lying on the old metal table, surrounded by tools and diagnostic devices. His translucent skin had lost its glow, and his breaths came in short, ragged bursts. Whatever species he was fragile compared to the hardy humans Riley was used to dealing with. Riley watched him for a moment, then turned back to her makeshift medical scanner, adjusting the settings to account for his unknown physiology. The readings were still chaotic, but she was starting to see some patterns. His blood pressure was dangerously low, and his core temperature was dropping fast. She needed to act quickly if she was going to keep him alive. "All right, let's see what we're dealing with here," she muttered to herself, grabbing a syringe filled with a general-purpose regenerative serum. It was designed for humans, but she hoped it would stabilize him enough to buy some time. She hesitated, looking down at Soren's faintly glowing veins. She had no idea how his body would react to human medicine, but she was running out of options. With a deep breath, she injected the serum into a vein in his arm. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, Soren's eyes shot open, glowing bright blue as he gasped in pain. Riley took a step back, heart racing. Hey, easy there," she said, raising her hands in a calming gesture. "I'm trying to help you. You're in my workshop, remember?" Soren's eyes darted around the room, wild and disoriented, before they settled on Riley. His breathing gradually slowed, and he sank back onto the table, exhausted. "Where am I?" he rasped. "New Detroit." "Outskirts, to be exact," Riley replied, checking the scanner again. The serum seemed to be stabilizing him, at least for now. "You crash-landed here a few hours ago. Lucky for you, I found you before your enemies did." Soren's eyes widened at that. He tried to sit up, but his weakened body betrayed him. "Enemies, they will come," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "You must leave. They will kill you for helping me." Riley leaned against the table, crossing her arms. "Look, buddy, I've dealt with worse than a few pissed-off aliens. I'm not going anywhere. Now, why don't you tell me who's after you and why?" Soren closed his eyes, clearly struggling to stay conscious. "It is forbidden," he murmured. "But I had no choice." Riley's brows furrowed. "Forbidden? What did you do?" But Soren only shook his head weakly, his breathing growing shallower again. "All right, fine," she sighed. "Keep your secrets for now. But if you want to survive, I need to know what I'm dealing with." She turned back to her workbench, pulling out an old stasis pod she had scavenged years ago. It was designed to keep critically injured beings alive long enough to reach proper medical care if it still worked, that is. As she powered it up, the pod systems flickered uncertainly, but after a few adjustments, it stabilized. She quickly transferred Soren into the pod, hooking up the monitors to track his vitals. The blue glow from his veins intensified briefly before dimming again, and his breathing evened out. "There. That should hold you for a bit," she said, wiping the sweat from her brow. "But you're going to have to tell me more if you want to get out of this alive." Suddenly, the shop's security alarm blared, echoing through the walls. Riley's heart skipped a beat. She checked the monitors. There were 3 unknown lifeforms approaching the perimeter. "Damn it, they found us already," she muttered. She grabbed her plasma wrench, her trusty weapon of choice, and powered up her workshop's automated defenses. The turrets hummed to life, swiveling toward the entrance as the shop's doors rattled from a heavy impact. Soren's eyes fluttered open in the stasis pod. "No, too late," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "They are here." A loud crash echoed through the workshop as the reinforced door buckled under a powerful blow. Riley's eyes darted to Soren. "If you've got any last-minute tricks up your sleeve, now's the time," she said. But Soren was too weak to respond. His eyes were half closed, his glowing veins dimming once more. Riley gritted her teeth, cursing under her breath. She had no idea what she was up against, but she wasn't about to let some alien bounty hunters tear apart her shop or her new patient. She pressed a hidden button under her workbench, activating the emergency lockdown protocol she had rigged up years ago. Heavy metal shutters slammed down over the windows, and the air vents sealed shut. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the security turrets spinning up to full power. "All right, you bastards," she muttered, tightening her grip on her plasma wrench. "Let's see what you're made of." The door finally gave way, and 3 figures clad in black combat suits stormed into the workshop. They moved with the precision of trained assassins, their weapons glowing with an eerie green light. Riley ducked behind a pile of old engine parts as the air was filled with the hiss of laser fire. "Stay hidden," she whispered to Soren, even though he was barely conscious. "I'll handle this." She sprang from her hiding spot, hurling a modified shock grenade into the midst of the intruders. The explosion sent a cascade of electricity crackling through the air, temporarily disabling their weapons and forcing them to stagger back. Taking advantage of the confusion, Riley lunged forward, swinging her plasma wrench with all her strength. The first attacker's helmet shattered under the impact, revealing a scaly, reptilian face twisted in rage. Before he could recover, she delivered a powerful kick to his chest, sending him sprawling to the ground. But the other 2 were already recovering, raising their weapons. Riley dove behind a stack of metal crates, narrowly avoiding a blast that singed the edge of her jacket. She was running out of tricks and time. Just as the remaining attackers closed in, a blinding light filled the room. Riley shielded her eyes, peeking through her fingers to see Soren, standing unsteadily outside the stasis pod. His entire body was glowing, his eyes blazing with a brilliant blue light. "Stay away from her," Soren roared, raising one trembling hand. The air crackled with energy as a shockwave erupted from his outstretched fingers, slamming into the intruders with the force of a freight train. The attackers were thrown back, their suits sparking and short-circuiting as they crashed into the far wall. Breathing heavily, Soren collapsed to his knees, the light around him flickering and fading. Riley rushed to his side, catching him before he fell completely. "Easy there," she said, her voice softer now. You saved my ass back there, but you're in no shape to keep doing that. Soren looked up at her, his eyes dim but grateful. You should have let them take me, he whispered. I am the danger to you. Riley shook her head. Maybe. But I don't leave people behind, especially not when they're hurt. Now let's get you patched up before more of those guys show up. As the sound of distant sirens grew louder, Riley knew it was only a matter of time before more enemies arrived. They couldn't stay here. With a determined look, she began packing up her tools and supplies. Hang in there, Soren, she said, lifting him into a hover cart. We're going to have to find a new place to hide. And this time, I want some answers. No more secrets, got it? Soren nodded weakly, a flicker of determination in his eyes. As they sped out of the workshop into the dark streets of New Detroit, Riley couldn't help but wonder what kind of mess she'd gotten herself into. But whatever it was, she was all in. The dark streets of New Detroit blurred into streaks of neon light as Riley navigated her hover bike through the winding alleys and backstreets. The cold night air stung her face, and the sound of sirens echoed ominously in the distance. Behind her, Soren lay slumped in the sidecar, barely conscious, his translucent skin flickering like a dying light bulb. Hang in there, Soren, she called over her shoulder, gunning the throttle. We're almost out of the industrial district. But even as she spoke, Riley knew that wasn't entirely true. They were in the heart of New Detroit, a sprawling labyrinth of towering structures, old warehouses, and forgotten alleys. It was easy to hide here unless you had 3 heavily armed pursuit ships hot on your tail. The ships were closing in fast, their black, sleek forms like predatory birds against the backdrop of the glowing city skyline. The hum of their engines grew louder, punctuated by bursts of green laser fire that illuminated the night. Sparks flew as a shot grazed the hover bike's rear stabilizer, causing it to wobble violently. Damn it! Riley hissed, yanking the controls to stabilize the bike. She veered sharply around a corner, narrowly avoiding a stack of old cargo crates. The city blurred around her, a chaotic mix of flashing billboards, graffiti-covered walls, and flickering streetlights. She needed to shake these pursuers, and fast. Soren's weak voice came through in broken gasps. Leave me, they will stop chasing. Riley ignored him, her focus locked on the route ahead. Not a chance, buddy. I'm not leaving you behind. Now shut up and let me figure out how to get us out of this mess. She scanned the alleyways for an escape route, her mind racing. These guys were clearly professionals, mercenaries, bounty hunters, or worse. They had been tracking Soren for who knows how long, and now she was caught in the crossfire. As another blast narrowly missed them, Riley spotted a narrow side street, almost hidden between 2 towering structures. Hold on tight, she yelled, swerving hard to the right. The hover bike scraped against the corner of a building, sending sparks flying, but it fit barely. The narrow alley was too tight for the pursuit ships, forcing them to pull up and find another route. Riley allowed herself a brief, triumphant grin as the sound of the ship's engines faded, but she knew it wouldn't take long for them to track her again. I've got a plan, she muttered to herself. I just hope we're not too late. She sped down the labyrinth of back alleys, heading toward an old section of the city that had been abandoned years ago when New Detroit expanded upward. The deeper she went, the darker and quieter it became, until the only sounds were the soft hum of the bike's engine and Soren's labored breathing. Finally, they reached an old maintenance tunnel hidden behind a rusted gate. Riley hopped off the bike, her fingers working quickly to override the ancient electronic lock. This should buy us some time, she said, glancing back at Soren, whose eyes were half closed. Just hang in there a little longer. With a satisfying click, the gate creaked open, and Riley pushed the hover bike inside, carefully maneuvering Soren through the narrow entrance. Once they were inside, she pulled the gate shut behind them, securing it with a heavy chain. The tunnel was dark, the air heavy with the scent of mildew and rust, but it was safe for now. The soft blue glow of Soren's veins had almost completely faded. He was getting worse, his breath shallow and labored. Riley knew he wouldn't survive much longer without proper medical attention. She pulled out her scanner again, but the readings were grim. Whatever species he was, he needed something far beyond the makeshift supplies she had on hand. "I need to know what's wrong with you," she said, her voice low but urgent. "If you don't start talking, you're not going to make it." Soren's eyes flickered open, pain and exhaustion written across his face. "It's a bioweapon," he rasped. "My people developed it to control us." Riley's eyes widened. "A bioweapon? What the hell are you talking about?" Soren struggled to sit up, his body shaking. "I was part of a program, experiments. They infected us to control our abilities. But I escaped." He coughed, a dark, oily substance dripping from the corner of his mouth. "I stole the data, proof of what they've done." Riley's mind reeled as she processed his words. A bioweapon designed to control an entire species? It was no wonder they were hunting him. And now, she had unknowingly stepped into the middle of a galactic conspiracy. "You've got a data chip, don't you?" she asked, her tone urgent. "Where is it?" Soren's trembling hand reached into a compartment hidden beneath his chest plate. He pulled out a small, crystalline data chip, its surface shimmering with strange, alien runes. "This contains the data," he said, pressing it into her hand. "You must get it to your authorities." Riley stared at the chip in her hand, feeling the weight of what it represented. If the information on this chip was real, it could expose the Congen's dark experiments and possibly save countless lives. But it also meant that whoever was hunting Soren wouldn't stop until they had the chip in her head. Before she could respond, the sound of distant engines reverberated through the tunnel. The mercenaries had tracked them down. Time was running out. "Damn it, we've got to move," Riley said, shoving the chip into her pocket. She helped Soren onto his feet, draping his arm over her shoulder. He was light, almost too light, his body trembling with every step. They made their way deeper into the tunnel, the sound of the approaching engines growing louder. Up ahead, Riley spotted a service hatch that led up to the city's old subway system. If they could reach the underground network, they might just have a chance to lose their pursuers. With a grunt, she pushed open the hatch and helped Soren climb through. The tunnel opened into a vast, darkened station, long abandoned and covered in graffiti. Faint beams of light filtered in from the street level, casting eerie shadows. But before they could get far, the mercenaries burst through the tunnel entrance behind them, their green laser sights cutting through the darkness. Riley's heart pounded as she frantically scanned the area. They were surrounded. "This way," she hissed, dragging Soren behind a crumbling pillar as laser fire erupted around them. She pulled out her plasma wrench, her trusty weapon, and peered around the corner. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and Soren was too weak to defend himself again. Just as the mercenaries closed in, Soren's eyes opened wide, glowing brighter than ever before. "I can help," he whispered, his voice tinged with desperation. "But you must promise me." "Promise you what?" Riley asked, dodging a burst of laser fire. "Destroy the chip if they take us. Don't let them have it." Riley met his gaze, seeing the determination in his alien eyes. She nodded. "I promise." With that, Soren closed his eyes and focused, his body trembling. A wave of energy erupted from him, sending shockwaves through the station. The mercenaries were thrown back, their weapons sparking and failing. Riley didn't waste a second. She hoisted Soren onto her shoulder and sprinted toward an old maintenance exit, the path now clear. As they disappeared into the darkness, the echoes of the mercenaries' shouts faded behind them. For now, they were safe. But Riley knew it wouldn't last. They had the data, the proof of the Congen's experiments, but the question remained, where could they go where the galaxy's most powerful hunters couldn't follow? As they emerged into the cold night air, Riley knew one thing for sure: they needed allies, and fast. Because whatever secrets were hidden in that data chip, they were worth killing for. And she wasn't about to let Soren or herself become another casualty in someone else's war. The early morning light crept through the grimy windows of the old safe house, casting long shadows across the dusty floor. The safe house was hidden in the lower levels of New Detroit, deep in a forgotten industrial zone that even the city's automated drones had long since abandoned. The place reeked of rust and damp, but for now, it was secure. Riley eased Soren down onto a ratty old couch that had seen better decades. His glowing veins were flickering faintly, his breaths coming in shallow gasps. She had managed to drag him here after narrowly escaping their last confrontation, but he was deteriorating quickly. The serum she had injected earlier was losing its effect, and the strange alien bioweapon coursing through his veins was taking its toll. As she rummaged through her pack for more medical supplies, Soren's hand reached out weakly, brushing against her arm. "Riley, it's too late," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I can't hold on much longer." "Shut up," Riley snapped, not unkindly. "You're not dying on my watch, you hear me?" But even as she said it, she could see the truth in his eyes. His glow was fading, his energy draining like a flickering light about to burn out. A loud, insistent beep interrupted her thoughts. Riley's heart skipped a beat. It was the encrypted comm link she had activated as a last resort. She had sent a distress signal to one of her old contacts, a retired engineer named Marcus Kane, who had connections deep within the underground resistance. If anyone could help them, it was him. She grabbed the comm link and pressed the accept button. Marcus's grizzled face appeared on the cracked screen, his eyes narrowing as he took in her haggard appearance. "Riley," he growled. "You look like you've been through hell. What the hell have you gotten yourself into?" "Long story short, I've got an alien on my hands, dying from some kind of bioweapon," she replied. "And I've got half the galaxy's mercenaries hunting us down for a data chip that could expose their dirty secrets. I need your help, Marcus." Marcus leaned back, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "This is big, Quinn. If what you're saying is true, this chip could blow the lid off some serious galactic conspiracies. But if you're caught, they'll kill you and anyone who's helped you." Riley glanced over at Soren, who was slipping in and out of consciousness. "I don't have a choice, Marcus. If I don't get him help soon, he's dead. I need a safe place to treat him and someone who can decode this chip." Marcus sighed heavily. "All right, there's an old med-bay in Sector 9 that's been abandoned for years. The equipment there should still work, but it's not exactly up to date. I'll send the coordinates. But Quinn, be careful. You're playing a dangerous game." "Yeah, well," Riley said, forcing a grin, "danger's kind of my thing." The comm link went dead, and Riley quickly memorized the coordinates. She had one last gamble to play, and it was going to be a hell of a ride to get there. But first, she had to stabilize Soren enough to move him. She crouched beside him, lifting his head to pour a small vial of her last emergency serum down his throat. "Hang on, Soren. We're getting out of here. I'm not letting you die after all this trouble." His eyes fluttered open for a moment, the faintest hint of a smile on his lips. "You should have left me to die," he whispered. "I am a threat to you." Riley shook her head fiercely. "Too late for that kind of talk, pal. We're in this together now." She loaded Soren onto the hovercart she had salvaged, securing him with straps to prevent him from falling off during their escape. As she did, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The mercenaries had been relentless, and if Marcus's warning was anything to go by, they were about to face even bigger threats. The med-bay of Sector 9. The abandoned med-bay was a crumbling relic from a bygone era. The air was thick with dust, and the sterile white walls were now stained with rust and decay. But it still had working equipment, a small miracle in this part of New Detroit. Riley kicked open the door, dragging Soren inside. She quickly scanned the room, her eyes falling on an old medical pod that was still humming with power. "All right, let's hope this thing still works," she muttered, carefully lowering Soren into it. As the pod sealed around him, she tapped the controls, initiating a full diagnostic scan. The ancient screen flickered, lines of alien script and outdated code scrolling rapidly. Soren's vitals were weak, but the pod was stabilizing him, at least temporarily. But there was a problem. The pod required a special serum to neutralize the bioweapon in Soren's body, something Riley didn't have. She needed to find an alternative fast. "Marcus," she hissed into her comlink. "The mid-base serum dispensers are empty. I need something that can flush a bioweapon out of his system. Can you get me a list of compatible alternatives?" The comlink crackled to life. "Hold on," Marcus replied, his voice filled with static. "I've got some old files on Congen physiology. Sending you a list now, but you're not going to like it." The list popped up on her screen, and Riley's stomach sank. The only viable antidote required a rare compound extracted from a specific alien plant, the kind found only in the off-limits quarantine zones outside the city. "Of course it's never easy," she muttered, slamming the comlink down. But there was no time to hesitate. If she didn't act fast, Soren wouldn't survive the next few hours. "Stay with me, Soren," she whispered to the unconscious alien, gently touching his arm. "I'm going to get that antidote, and then we're getting the hell out of this city." Into the quarantine zone. Riley's heart pounded as she navigated the broken, overgrown streets leading to the quarantine zone. It was a place no sane person would willingly venture into, a hotbed of mutated plants, rogue drones, and wild creatures left to thrive in the toxic air. But she had no choice. The compound she needed was her only shot at saving Soren. As she reached the crumbling perimeter fence, she spotted movement in the shadows. Mercenaries. They had found her trail again. Without hesitation, she powered up her plasma wrench and sprinted into the dense, mutated jumble beyond the fence. The foliage was thick and twisted, pulsing with strange luminescence. Every sound was amplified: the rustle of leaves, the growl of unseen creatures, and the distant whir of drone patrols. She kept moving, her breath coming in short gasps, until she found what she was looking for, a cluster of the rare, glowing plants growing in the heart of the quarantine zone. Just as she reached for the plant, a shot rang out. A searing pain erupted in her shoulder, and she spun around to see a squad of mercenaries closing in. She gritted her teeth, grabbed the plant, and fired her plasma wrench at the attackers, buying herself just enough time to escape. With her shoulder bleeding and her vision blurring, she stumbled back to the hoverbike. Come on," she muttered, desperately trying to start the engine. It roared to life just as the mercenaries appeared at the edge of the clearing. She took off at full speed, racing back toward the med-bay with the precious antidote in hand. A fateful choice. Back at the med-bay, Soren was on the brink of death. His veins had turned a sickly black, and his breathing was shallow. Riley burst through the door, her shoulder bleeding profusely, but she ignored the pain, injecting the extracted serum into the pod system. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the blackness in Soren's veins began to recede, his breathing evening out. The glow returned to his eyes, faint but unmistakable. "You did it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You saved me." Riley slumped to the floor, exhaustion washing over her. "Yeah, well, don't go thanking me yet. We're not out of this mess." Suddenly, the comlink beeped again. It was Marcus. "Riley, they're closing in on your position. You need to move, now. I've got a ship waiting at the old port. Get there if you can." Riley looked at Soren, then at the data chip in her hand. "You heard him," she said, helping Soren to his feet. "We're not done yet. If we can get this chip to the right people, we might just change the fate of your people and mine." Together, they stumbled out into the cold dawn, the mercenaries hot on their heels. The choice had been made. There was no turning back now. They were fighting not just for their own survival, but for the chance to expose the truth and free those still under the Congen's control. As the first rays of sunlight pierced the sky, Riley and Soren disappeared into the shadows of New Detroit, determined to bring the fight to those who thought they could control the fate of entire worlds.